Begin today the Gemara on Daf Tzadik Zayin Amud Beis in the Mishnah. Sagt Heilige Mishnah, Giyoires, Ha-Giyoires Shen is Gairu, a Giyoires that became a Giyoires, and Shen is Gairu Baneo Ima, and her children were Nizgayer together with her. So what happens then? So now her two sons that were Megayer along with her, and one of them got married and passed away without any children. So usually there's a halacha of chalitza or yibum by brothers, but over here by these two children that were megayer, there's no chalitza or yibum for them. And what's the reason for this? Because the halacha of yibum only applies when you have brothers that share the same father. But as Rashi here brings, when it comes to the relation of brothers that their father is a guy, there's no relation for this. Rashi brings a pasuk which the Gemara will quote: Zirma susim zirmasam, that the zera of the av, the zera of the father, does not create a relation between these brothers. So there are brothers that share the same father as far as Torah is concerned. So therefore, there's no chalitza or yibum. No. The banal ima, the children were megayah. The fact that the mother is megayah is not the main point here. The main point is that these two brothers were megayah, but because they are born from a father that's a guy, so there's no chalitza or yibum. Then the Mishnah continues, a bigger chiddush, afilu hayrasai shel rishon shaloi b'kedusha. If the first brother, so his pregnancy began b'shaloi b'kedusha when his mother was a guy, when his father was a guy, and then v'leidasi b'kedusha, and then when he's born, his mother was megayah, his father was megayah, and now he's born as a yid. V'asheni, the second brother, hayrasa v'leidasi b'kedusha. The father and the mother were megayer before he was born, so he was born totally as a yid. Nevertheless, the halacha still remains the same, that because the first one, he was born, his pregnancy that is, began before he became a yid, so therefore his mother became a yid, so therefore still they're not considered to be brothers. As the Gemara will see, the Gemara here says, there's another point, which is Gersh and his guy kekatan shenaylet dami. Once he becomes a Gersh, kekatan shenaylet, and there's no relation between him and his brother, so there's no mitzvah of yibum. The same halacha like by a giyaris applies by a shivcha as well. The same thing, a shivcha kananis. So there's no yichus for the brothers in their relation to their father, and also when they become a gersh and his guy kekatan shenayla dami. So therefore there's no mitzvah of yibum. So the Gemara brings a story that happened. Bnei Yudin Amsa, the children of Yudin, which was a shivcha kananis, ishtachra. They both got freed and they became Yidden. Shara lahu Rav Acha bar Yaakov. So Rav Acha bar Yaakov allowed for them lemintzav noshida dadi, to marry the wives of one another. So of course usually there is a iser minatayre to marry eishes achiv, to marry your brother's wife in a case where your brother has children after your brother passes away. If he has children, so then there's no mitzvah of yibum. You're not allowed to marry your brother's wife. It's one of the arais which is a iser kadis. But over here, for these two brothers, because they were Gadim, so therefore he said that the Gersh and his guy kekatan shenayla dami, so that relation between the brothers does not exist. So if one brother passes away, the other one is allowed to marry his brother's wife. Amalei Rave, so Rave said to Rav Acha bar Yaakov, but what Rav Sheshes asar? Rav Sheshes said that in such a case it's asar. And this is Ism the Rabbanon, even though in Torah they are not related, but Rabbanon made a gzeira that they should not marry a brother's wife, even in this case. So Amalei, so Rav Acha bar Yaakov said, no, who asar? He says that it's not allowed. V'anosharina. However, my opinion is that it is allowed. So that's a machlokes here between Rav Acha bar Yaakov and Rav Sheshes. So the Gemara here brings two versions regarding which case they had this machlokes. So the question basically is whether there's a gzeira midrabanan here or not. Everybody agrees that minat Torah Gershon is guy kekatan shenayla dami, and there's no relation between these brothers. But the question is whether chachamim will geyser or not. So the Gemara explains.
It's only shy after the person was born already good.
Yeah, okay, say that. That's what we're talking about over here.
Right.
Yeah. Well, over there, even in that case, the hayrasai was shaloi b'kedusha. Okay, we'll see in a moment in the Gemara. And the hayrasai shaloi b'kedusha means that. Okay, let's see weiter now. So the Gemara says, Mina av v'loi meneim. If we're talking about these two brothers here, they have the same father and not the same mother, so kula al malei pligi d'shari. So nobody will disagree that they will be allowed to marry one another's wives. And the reason is, as Rashi explains, because this is something that nobody will make a mistake about this. Everybody understands that the reason we're allowing to marry a wife's brother is because their father is a guy, and because their father is a guy, so they have no relation to one another. And Rashi actually brings up another point here, that when it comes to a father that's a guy, so we don't even know for sure who the father is. The Gemara once said before that when it comes to a mother, a father that are a guy, we know who the mother is, but we don't necessarily know who the father is. Could be that she was Mizana, and even though they seem to be brothers, but Lav Dafka, they even have the same father. So if the father is the guy, so everybody understands the reason we're allowing them to marry one another is because they're not really brothers. We don't even consider them to have the same father, B'chlal. So nobody will confuse this with a regular case of two brothers that are Yidden, that of course they're not allowed to marry one each other's wives. So over there's no gzeira, and everybody agrees that it's allowed. Mina ein v'loy manav. If we're talking over here about these two brothers that were Megayer and they share the same mother and they don't share the same father, so over here, kula almalei pligi da'aser. Everybody will agree that over here there is a gzeira. Because they share the same mother, so they look mamish like brothers. So if you're going to say that over here they're allowed to marry each other's wives, people might mistake and think that also for two Yidden it's allowed. So even though, again, this is only Gzeira Midrabanan, because Minat Teire, even though they share the same mother, but Gershon is Guy Kekotn Shenoilad, they're not brothers. But nevertheless, because they share the same mother, so someone might make the mistake and apply the same thing to two Yidden that are brothers, so therefore there's a Gzeira here. So there nobody disagrees. So where is the Machlekes? Ki pligi mina av u mina eim. When these two brothers that were Megayer have the same father and the same mother. So here the question is, how do people view this? Will people make a mistake about this or not? Man de Shari, so Rav Acha bar Yaakov that says that it's allowed and there's no gzeirins in this case. So he says, Basa Abisha Dinon, that people will say about these two brothers, why it's mutter for them to marry one another's wives is because they share the same father. The Habanei Planya Karulahu. People refer to them as the children of this father. And therefore, mitzad the father, everybody understands that they're not considered to be related, and therefore no one will compare this to a case of two brothers that are Yidden. That's why there's no gzeira. Rav Sheshes says, no, karuluhu nami b'nei plainis. Some people do refer to these two brothers also as the children of this one mother, and therefore, if they have the same mother, they do look like brothers, even though the truth is that they're not, because they were Megayer, but they do look like brothers, and therefore people could confuse this with two brothers, and therefore there is Gzeira. That's the first version. But Vekedamar or Vekedamri, another version here is Polig Rav Acha bar Yaakov afilu b'achim meneim. Rav Acha bar Yaakov argues with Rav Sheshes, even when these brothers that were Megayer have the same mother, still he says that now once they're Megayer, Kekotn Shenoilad, and therefore they can marry one each other's wives. In my time, and the reason is Gershon is Guy Kekotn Shenoiladami. It's like he's born again, and therefore there's no relation, and there's no Gzeira Midrabanan either. Even in this case, everybody will understand that the heter is because of Gershon is Guy, and no one will compare this to two brothers that are Yidden. So the Gemara brings from what it said in our Mishnah. So Tnan, it said in our Mishnah, Giyerish and his Gayer b'nei ima. A Giyeris was Megayer and her sons were Megayer as well. And now one of them died without children. So what happens? Lecheltzen v'loy miyavmin. There's no chalitza and there's no yibum. So right now, the way the Gemara understands this Mishnah is a bit different than when I read it before. What is it? The Gemara understands what the Mishnah is saying is not only that you don't have the mitzvah of yibum and chalitza, but what the Mishnah is saying is you're not allowed. There's an isser to do yibum and chalitza here. My time, why is there an isser? Why aren't they allowed to do yibum or chalitza? Why would one brother not be allowed to marry his brother's wife? So we understand that the mitzvah doesn't apply, because minat Torah they're not really related. But again, the Gemara thinks now, not only is it not a mitzvah, but it's actually forbidden for one of them to marry his brother's wives. Why? Lav mishom da'asiri. Don't you think it's that this is the Isser that Rav Sheshes over here is saying that there's an Isser Midrabanan by two brothers that became Geirim, that Chachamim said that one shouldn't marry the brother's wife, because then people will confuse this and think that even by Yidden it's allowed. So here we see in our Mishnah that there's this Gzeira. Answers the Gemara, Loi, that's not how you learn Pshat in the Mishnah. Rather, the Pshat of the Mishnah is the Einan b'Teiras Chalitza v'Yibum. All it's saying is that the Torah, the mitzvah of Yibum and Chalitza, does not apply to these two brothers because they're not considered to be brothers that share the same father. And V'Shar Yilal, so therefore, after a brother passed away without any children, she can go and get married to whoever she wants. And V'Enu Nami Sharu. And for that matter, they're also allowed to marry one another. But the point that he was saying is that the mitzvah of Yibum Chalitza doesn't apply. Frag the Gemara, how does this fit though with the next case of the Mishnah? What does it say after this? After this the Mishnah says, Afilu. The next case was regarding where one brother was, the mother became pregnant when she was not yet a Yid. and then gave birth to him when she was, and then the other brother was born a Yid. And even over there, it said that there's no Yibam and Chalitza. So now, what does that afilu mean? That there's a bigger Chiddush there. So the Gemara explains as follows. If you're going to say that what the Mishnah is saying over here is that not only that there's no mitzvah of Yibum and Chalitza, but they're actually forbidden to get married to one another. So Hainu diktani afilu. So that we understand why in the second part of the Mishnah it uses the term afilu, that there's a bigger Chiddush in the second case. What's the bigger Chiddush? The first brother, so he was born, so by the pregnancy began when his mother was not a Yid yet. So if so, he's a ger. And Vasheni, the second brother, he was born totally bigdusha. His mother was already a Geyaris. And therefore, ukishtei imois dami. So mitzad the fact that one became pregnant, his mother became pregnant when she was not a Yid, and one when she was, so it's like two different mothers. One, there was a mother when she was a guy, one was a mother when he's a Yid. So to people it looks like two different mothers. So therefore people might say that over here they should be allowed to marry one another's wives. But nevertheless, what is the Mishnah saying? Nevertheless, they're also to marry one another. And the reason is because Be'emes, it's Asam and Atayra over here, because he was born a Yid. Once he's born a Yid and his brother was born a Yid, so it's Asam and Atayra. But the Chiddush over here is, even though they look like they're coming from two different mothers, one mother was a guy and one mother was a Yid, nevertheless it's Asam. That's the Chiddush of the Mishnah.
He was born after. He was born after she was Megaya.
Right, correct.
So the son was not from Megaya. He was born.
Correct. Yeah, correct. No, well, but his Hayrasa Shalei Bikdusha though, because Hayrasa Shalei Bikdusha, his mother. It looks like mitzad his mother. It looks like that he has a different mother. It's a mistake. You're right. People are going to think to say this. People are going to think to say that because they have two different mothers, so therefore you might think that they're not brothers. No. So that's what the Mishnah is saying. That be'emes.
No, I'm thinking that people will say they have the same mother because everybody knows that the mother was the guy before the kid was born.
Okay, I hear. Okay, Chanami, that's a svara. But here the Gemara says that there's also a svara. People are going to say that Hayrasa was Shalai Bikdusha. So Ela I Amrit. However, if you're going to say Sharu, that really over here when the Mishnah says that there's no Chalitza and Yibum, it's not saying that they're not allowed to marry one another. All it was saying is that there's no mitzvah of Chalitza and Yibum. But really, these two Geirim, they can marry one each other's wives. It is allowed. So my afilu, what's the chiddush over here in the second case when it said afilu? That in that case, when you have over here one brother that was born before the Geiris of the mother, or again the pregnancy that was before the Geiris of the mother, and the second child was Hayrasav and Leidasav was Bikdusha. So what's the afilu over here that it's saying that for them there's no mitzvah of Yibam and Chalitza? It's Pashut. It has nothing to do with the mother. What does the mitzvah of Yibam and Chalitza have to do with? It has to do with brothers that share the same father. That's what it has to do with. So over here, these two brothers, both of them, they don't share the same father. Why? Because one brother, he was born from a father that was a guy. So if he's born from a father, his pregnancy began with a father that's a guy. So if his pregnancy was from a father that's a guy, so then there's no mitzvah of Yibam and Chalitza. There's no afilu here. L'chayre, there's no additional chiddush to this. So why does the Mishnah use this term afilu? Answers the Gemara. Second, my afilu. So the answer is, even if you're going to say that the point that the Mishnah is coming to say that there's no mitzvah of Yibam and Chalitza, so what's the chiddush over here in the second case? The afagav, the tarvayu, leidoson bikdusha. Even though both of them, their birth, they were both born as Yidden. And if so, there's a much bigger svara that people are going to confuse these two brothers with two regular Yidden. So if you're going to come and say that these two brothers, they are allowed to marry one each other's wives, because over here I apply Gershon is Gaika Kotn Shanailadami, so you're going to come and confuse this with Yidden. But nevertheless, still, they are allowed to marry one each other's brothers, because of Gershon is Gaika Kotn Shanailadami. That brother, that his pregnancy was Shaloi Bikdusha, so he's a ger when he's born, because his pregnancy began when he was Shaloi Bikdusha, so therefore he's a ger, so he's allowed to marry his brother's wife. But the chiddush over here is, people will say that they were both born Bikdusha, so they look like two regular Yidden. And therefore there's a bigger reason to make a gzeira that this would be confused with a regular yid. And nevertheless, the Mishnah is saying that it's allowed. That's the pshat in the Mishnah. Iked Amri, there's another version regarding this Mishnah here that we just discussed, but in the exact reverse. The same point that we just learned, but it comes to it in the reverse way. So according to this version, the Gemara was saying that it's logical to say the sharu, that the Mishnah here, when it was saying loy cheltzim v'loy miyavmin, what did the Mishnah mean to say? That there's no mitzvah of yid mechalitza. And therefore these two brothers are allowed to marry whoever they want, even each other's wives as well. And so it makes sense that this is what the Mishnah is saying. Why? Diktani, because in the second case of the Mishnah it says afilu. So what's the afilu? What's the bigger chiddush in the second case of the Mishnah? So now, if what the Mishnah here is saying is that these two brothers are allowed to marry one another, so hainu diktani afilu. So therefore there's going to be a chiddush in the second case. What's the chiddush? The afagav the tarvayu leidasam b'kedusha. Even though both of these brothers, at the time of their birth, their mother was already Megayah, and their birth is b'kedusha. And therefore the asila achlufi bi Yisrael. So you could very easily confuse these two brothers to a regular two brothers that are Yidden. But nevertheless, sharu. These two brothers are allowed to marry each other's wives because one of them, his hirayon, his pregnancy began when he was not a Yid yet, so therefore they don't share the same father. And it's a gersh and his guy katan shenayla dami as well. And therefore they're allowed to marry each other's wives. That's the chiddush over here. But if you're going to say that the pshat in the Mishnah is means that they're not allowed to marry one another, and there's a gzeira that they should not marry one another, so maya filu. What is the chiddush over here benigeya to the second case of the Mishnah? And the answer is, like we explained before, the afal gav, the risha in hayrasa shaloi b'kedusha v'legdasa b'kedusha, the first brother. So his pregnancy began shaloi b'kedusha, and his birth was b'kedusha. V'hasheni hayrasa v'legdasa b'kedusha, and the second brother, both the pregnancy and the birth was b'kedusha after the mother was megaya. The kishtei imo is dami. So it seems like that they have two different mothers. One of them, the pregnancy began when his mother was a guy, and the other one when his mother was Megai already. So it seems like they have two different brothers. But nevertheless, they are usher to marry one another because since they were both born b'kedusha, so therefore they're usher to marry one another. That's the chiddush of the Mishnah. Okay, so from our Mishnah, there's no raya to this machlokes of Rav Acha bar Yaakov and Rav Sheshes. Tashema, the Gemara brings another brayse. Shnei achin tumim, you have two brothers that are twins. Geidim, and they both were Megayer. Or two brothers that were twins that were freed, and they were Megayer. So there's no chalitza or yibum between them. And also the issur of marrying your brother's wife does not apply. So this is mamish addressing this exact case that they argued about. There's no issur of eshesach, it says here. Or no, it doesn't say no issur, sorry. It says en chayovim. There's no chiyav, which is going to be the gediyuk of the Gemara. Now, if their pregnancy began before their mother was Megayer, and then they were born in Kedusha after the mother was Megayer, still there's no chalitza or yibum because they're not considered to be brothers that share the same father. And for chalitza and yibum, that's the main point. But in such a case, if they were both born in Kedusha, so then there is a issur of eshesach. If they're both, the pregnancy and the birth is after the mother was Megaya, so then their birth, their pregnancy was all when they were Yidden, so they're 100% Yidden. So the Gemara, Katani Mias, what does it say here in this Braise? Ein chayavin mishum eshesach. That over here, these two brothers that were Megayer, there's no chiyuv because of the issur of eshesach. So the Gemara is medayik chiyuv eleke. That means that the chiyuv there isn't minatayre. There is no chiyuv of kares for marrying your brother's wife. But it sounds like that midrabanan there is an issur even by geirim to marry a brother's wife, like Rav Sheshes said. Answers the Gemara, no, there's no raya from here. Hu adin that fil ha'isur nami leke. The truth is that even in issur there isn't either. So why does it use the term of ein chayavin? It should have said that it's totally mutter. The ID the boil misni seife aval chayavin, because in the seife it uses the term chayavin. So tanin amireisha ein chayavin. So on the reisha it also uses the term chayavin. But really we can say like Rav Acha bar Yaakov that a brother is that these two brothers that are geirim, it's totally allowed to marry your brother's wife. Omar Rava, now Rava says another point here, where the Gemara is going to come back to this machlokes between Rav Sheshes and Rav Acha bar Yaakov, but Rava now says something that's based on what we just learned in this Braise. Ha da'amar Rabbanan. This b'chlal that the Chachamim said, that ein av le-mitzri, that when it comes to a mitzri, and the Gemara here says mitzri, but it doesn't only mean a mitzri, it means any guy, that by goyim, there's no relation to the father and the son regarding the arayis. From where do we know this? So loy taime, don't say that the reason is mishum the shtufi bezime, that because goyim always have relations with all kinds of people, and therefore the lo yediyah, we don't know who the father is. When you see two brothers, even though it seems like they share the same father, but you have no idea. How do you know who the father is? Avo yediyah, but what's if it's a case that you know for a fact who the father is? So then in such a case, chayshinon, maybe you should be concerned and say, oh, there is a relation here. We know who the father is. No, that's not true. Ela fila diyah nami, even if you know who the father is, loy chayshinon, we don't pay attention to that. There is no yichus of a child, a son, to a father by a guy regarding the Isser of Arayis. Right over here in this Braise, we were talking about two brothers that are twins. The Tippa Achasaya. So they come both from the same Tippa, from the same father. So we know for a fact that they share the same mother and the same father. The Tu'umim that are born from the same Tippa, and then it was divided into two, the two children that were born. The Ketani Seife. And what does it say here in this Braise, in the end of the Braise? There's no Chalitza and no Yibum. So what do you see from this? Afkure Rachmana Lazare, that the Torah was mafker, the children of a guy, of the father, that they are not connected. The Yichus does not go to the father for this Isser of Arayis. From where do we know this? The Chsiv, because the pasuk says that Besar Chameirim Besaram, their flesh is like the flesh of a donkey. Vizirmas Susim Zirmasam. And their flow, the zera that comes from a guy, is like the zera of a horse, and therefore there is no yichos from the guy to the father by legabi arayis. This is only legabi arayis, but legabi other things, legabi yerusha, there is a yichos of a guy to a father. Tashema, going back to the machlokes of Rav Sheshis and Rav Acha bar Yaakov, whether Gerim are allowed to marry each other's wives, even with the Rabbana would it be allowed. So Dam Rabbi Yossi said, Maise ben Niftayim Hager. There was a story with a person, Niftayim Hager, that he married the wife of his brother and they share the same mother. So this exact case that we're arguing about here, we're talking about. And the story came in front of the Chachamim, and they said to him, Ein ishus leger. There's no marriage for a ger. There's no, the ishus, the marriage does not take effect for a ger. So the Gemara asks him this, Ve'ela ger the Kaddish, the Gemara asks right here, Ve'ela ger the Kaddish, Hachanaim le'tafsiba kiddushin? What does this mean? Chachamim told him that the marriage does not take effect because there's no marriage for a ger. A ger that is mekadesh, a isha, the kiddushin doesn't take effect. Why not? Ela rather, what the Chachamim told him is, Ein iser eishes ach leger. There's no iser of marrying your brother's wife for a ger. That's what they told him. So this is mamish this case that Rav Sheshis and Rav Acha bar Yaakov were arguing about, and they said that it's mutter. So my love, don't you think, what was the story there? The nosva ach kushehu ger, that this is your brother's wife. He married this wife after he was megayer, and still they paskin for him that he's allowed to marry his brother's wife after he passes away. And says the Gemara, loy, that story was different. The nosva kushehu oivet kechavim. This is a wife that the brother married when he was a guy. But it wasn't his wife after he was Megayer. Afterwards, his brother was Megayer and his wife was Megayer. And now you want to go and marry your brother's wife. But he was never married to her when he was a Yid. So over here, there's no gzeira for this. Even Rav Sheshis would agree. This was your brother's wife when he was a guy. Maila memra, what's the chiddush that you're allowed to marry your brother's wife? That he was never married to her when he was a Yid, only as a guy? For sure, everybody would agree that's allowed. Answers the Gemara, no, I would think to say, maybe the Gzeira goes so far, just like Chachama wa Geizer, you're not allowed to marry your brother's wife, which is a ger, but he was married to her after he was Megayer. Maybe the Gzeira goes a step further, that even the brother's wife, he was married to her only as a guy, the Gzeira should apply then as well. Kamash Malon, that's what the Chachamim said to him, no, that the Gzeira does not apply that far. Tashema, another ayah, the Gemara tries to bring, the Amma ben Yasin. And the visual by the name Ben Yasin said, I went to a city in the overseas, Matzasi ger echad. So I found this ger, he married his brother, they shared the same mother, his wife, he married her. So Amarti loi, and I said to him, Bini, my son, mi hirshecha, who allowed you to do this? So Amali, and this person answered me, Hare Isha v'shiva b'nei al safsal zeh yashav. Here, on this bench, there was a mother with her 7 sons, that they were all Megayer. All these 7 sons were Megayer, and they sat over here on this bench. And al safsal zeh yashav Rabbi Akiva v'amar, and on this bench Rabbi Akiva sat. That's how you read it. On this bench Rabbi Akiva sat and said, Shnei dvarim. The following 2 points. First of all, he said that ger noise eishes achiv mi'imai. A ger is allowed to marry his brother's wife, even if they share the same mother, he's allowed to marry his brother's wife. A second thing Rabbi Akiva said, Va'amar vayihi dvar Hashem Yaina shenis leimar. Pasuk says that the Eibush spoke to Yaina a second time. Why does it say a second time? Shenis dibri meshchina, because the Torah wants to say that they only spoke to him a second time. Shlishis le dibri meshchina. But after he didn't listen to the Eibush to go to Nineveh, the Eibush did not speak to him a third time. Okay, so now Katani Mias. It says it clearly in this Braisa, the story that Ger Noise Eishes Achiv Meimai. A Ger is allowed to marry his brother's wife, even if they share the same mother. So again, the Gemara says, "My love, don't you think what was the psak then there? The Nasva Achiv Kishu Ger. This is even your brother's wife that he was married to her after he was a Ger. So on this, Rav Sheshu says there was a Gzeira. Answers the Gemara the same like it said before. Loi ditnasva kishahu oivid kechavim. The case over there was that it was his brother's wife. He was only married to her when he was a guy. In fact, the Gemara, if so, Maila Memre, what's the Chiddush? Again, the Gemara says, Ma'al deteme nigza kishu oivid kechavim atu kishu ger. Maybe I would say the same gzeira applies when he's a guy that is. Just like when he is a ger, kamash malon, that the gzeira does not apply. But now the Gemara looks at the story itself. What happened over here? Who are we trusting? Ben Yasin, this individual Ben Yasin reported what he heard that Rabbi Akiva paskened. Is he believed to say this halacha, or this person actually that spoke to Ben Yasin? He told Ben Yasin the psakdin that he heard from Rabbi Akiva. Is he believed? Any Talmud Chacham that comes and tells you a halacha that he heard from somebody that was paskened, so if he's telling you a halacha that he heard before it has any practical application, before a story actually comes up that he wants to use this psak din for, so then shaymin loy, we listen to him. But v'im lav, but if he's saying that he heard a certain psak din because it's not relevant for a certain story that already happened, and shaymin loy, we're not going to trust him because maybe he's only saying this because he wants to use it as a heter for what happened. So we can't trust him. So how are we trusting this individual to say what he heard from Rabbi Akiva? So the Gemara gives a few answers. This person didn't say it only in this story. He already had said it before. He was always repeating this in the name of Rabbi Akiva, what he heard. Another answer is because this person was bringing a proof to this story. He said there was a woman here with 7 children that were Megayer, and the psak was for these 7 children. So that's something you could inquire about. You can find out about that. So he's bringing a raya to this. He's not just saying that he heard it from Rabbi Akiva. A third answer, Shani Acha, the Ka'amar, Maisa Achrine Ba'ada. Because over here, he didn't say only one halacha that he heard from Rabbi Akiva, but he said also something else he heard from Rabbi Akiva about Yaina. So therefore, once we believe him regarding what he heard about Yaina, so we believe him regarding this Psak Din as well. Now the Gemara goes back to the story about Yaina. Omar, so what did it say in the Braise? This teaches me the Eibush spoke to Yaina a second time and not a third time. For the Gemara, we find the Eibush spoke to Yaina again. V'aksiv, there's a pasuk that says, "Hu Eishav es Gvul Yisrael melovei Hamas ad Yom Ha'arav kedvar Hashem asher diber biyad avdo Yaina ben Amitai." Like the Eibush spoke to Yaina ben Amitai. So here, this is a third Hanavi. The third time the Eibush spoke to Yaina. So the Gemara answers, Amar Ravina says, Lav Dafke means the Eibush spoke to Yaina. What it means is, Al Iske Ninveh Ka'amar. What it's saying over there is, just like the story with Ninveh, where the Eibush over there, because the people of Ninveh did Shuvah, so the Eibush didn't punish them. So similar, like the Eibush spoke to Yaina about Ninveh, the Eibush didn't punish the Yidden. But it's just similar to what happened there, but not that the Eibush spoke to Yaina again. Another answer the Gemara says, Rav Nachman beYitzchak Amar Hachi Ka'amar. That's what the pasuk there means. Kedvar Hashem asher diber biyad avdei hanovi, which means Kishem shenepach leninvei mira l'toiva, just like in the time of Ninveh, so it was turned over from bad to good. Kach b'mei Yeravam ben Yoyash nepach lem liyisrael mira l'toiva. So too in the times of the Yidden, it was turned over from bad to good. Okay, I'm sorry. So I said the pshat in the first answer not correct. The way I explained the first answer is what the Gemara is saying now. Actually, in the first answer, what Ravina was saying is al iske ninve, that Rabbi Akiva said that the Eibishter did not speak to Yaina more than a second time is only regarding that subject of Ninveh. The Eibishter asked Yaina to go to Ninveh. So after he didn't listen a second time, the Eibishter didn't speak to him about that subject again. But regarding other subjects, the Eibishter did speak to him again. That was the first answer. Okay, Tashma, going back to the machlokes between Rav Acha bar Yaakov and Rav Sheshes, where the Gerim are allowed to marry each other's wives. So it says in the Braisa as follows, a whole list of different things here regarding who a Ger is allowed to marry and who a Ger is not, in the relatives that he has. Ger shoyle dasa b'kedusha ve'rasa shaloi b'kedusha. So a Ger, his birth was b'kedusha, but his pregnancy was not b'kedusha. So yesh le she'era ein ve'ein le she'era av. So the relatives of his mother count, but the relatives of his father, because his pregnancy was shaloi b'kedusha, so the relatives of his father they're not his relatives. He's a Gershon, his guy, or katan shenoilet, so he could marry them. So therefore, Ketzad, achoisem min ha'eim, if he marries his sister from his mother, yaitzi, still let her go. That's a relation. Min ha'av, sister from the father, yikayim, you could remain married to her. It's a Gershon, his guy, katan shenoilet. Achois ha'av min ha'eim, a sister of the father from the mother. So over here, yaitzi. So he has to let her go. Because there's a certain tzad of aim of a mother here, so in order not to confuse this, so he has to let her go. Mina av, if it's his father's, if it's a sister from the father's father, so then yikayim. He's allowed to remain married to her. Achais ha'eim mina aim, a sister from the mother of the mother, so yaitzi. He's not allowed to remain married to her. Mina av, if it's a sister of the Av Mina'im. So over here there's a machlokes. Rab Meir Rama Yaitzi. Rab Meir says that he has to let her go. V'chacham Oimrim Yikayim, he could remain married to her. Shahay Rab Meir Raimer. Rab Meir said, Kol erve shehi mishum sheira aim. Any erve that there is by a ger, where there's any tzad of a mother that's involved in this relation, Yaitzi, you should let her go. Mishuma'av yikayim, but if the relation here is only a father that causes the relation and there's no mother that brings about the relation, so then yikayim, then it's allowed. And also, and this is what's negayat to the subject we're talking about, umutter be'eshes achiv. A ger is allowed to marry his brother's wife. Well, it says in our Gemara Me'imai, but the Bach takes it out for some reason. Okay. Ube'eshes achiyaviv, and he could also marry the wife of his father's brother. And also, v'shar kol arayis mutaris loy, all other arayis through marriage are mutta for him. So the Gemara explains what this refers to. Lasuya eshes sa'av, his father's wife, he could also marry. Again, the point is, because his pregnancy was shaloi b'kedusha, so his relation to his father does not exist. So therefore, he could even marry his father's wife. Then the Braisa says, nasa isho bita, that if this person marries a wife and his wife's daughter, in other words, this refers to when he was a guy. When he was still a guy, he married a wife, and then he married her daughter as well. So now, when he becomes a ger, kainis achas, he can marry one of them, umaitzi achas, and the other one he's not allowed to be married to. L'chatchila, then the Braisa says, l'chatchila lo yichnes. L'chatchila, he should not marry. Now, what this statement of l'chatchila lo yichnes is going on, the Gemara will explain. Meisa ishtai mutter b'chamaisai. So this ger, when his wife dies, he's allowed to marry his mother-in-law. But there's others that say aser b'chamaisai, that he's not allowed to marry his mother-in-law. So the Gemara will explain this machlokes, why, what the argument is about, whether this ger is allowed to marry his mother-in-law or not. But what does the Gemara now say? What do we see from this Braisa? Ketani mias, in the whole list that it said here in the Braisa, one of the things that it said is mutter be'eshes achiv. You're allowed to marry your brother's wife, like Rav Acha bar Yaakov's opinion. So again, the Gemara says, "My love, the nosva achiv kishu ger." We're talking about your brother that was a ger that married this woman, and still you're allowed to marry her. Answers the Gemara, "Loi." What the Braisa meant is the nosva kishu oivik kechavim. Your brother married her only when he was a guy. My lemembre. What's the chiddush if so? If he only married her as a guy? I would think that the gzeira should apply that even a wife that your brother married as a guy should also be yasa to you. Kamash malan. The chiddush is that there's no gzeira here. Now the Gemara just explains a few details in the Braisa. Amamar, it said before in the Braisa, nasa isho bita. You marry a mother and a daughter. That is that he married them when he was a guy. So now when he becomes a ger, kainis achas umaitzi achas. You can marry one and you leave the other. Then the Braisa concluded, l'chatchila lo yichnes. L'chatchila, don't marry them. Fragt the Gemara, what does this mean? Hashta, you're saying, afukim mapik, that even if you were married to both of them, so now you become a ger, you have to send one away, so l'chatchila mibaya. Needless to say that l'chatchila, he should not marry a mother and a daughter. So what's this l'chatchila layichnes mean over here? And it says the Gemara, hasam koi. It's going on the beginning of the Braisa. V'hachi ka'amar, and this is what this statement meant to say. Hach to Amar Rabbanon Yekayim, this that it said in the beginning of the Braisa, that all those relatives of your father for a ger are not relatives for him, and therefore he's allowed to be married to them. So that's only Yekayim. Once he was married to a relative of his father, he could remain married. But l'chatchila lo yichnos. Even a relative of the father, even though a gershon is gaka katan shenoila, then it's not your father, but nevertheless l'chatchila lo yichnos. Meisei, if his wife passed away, so what did it say in the Braisa? So here there was a machlokes. One opinion was mutar b'chamaisei, he's allowed to marry his mother-in-law. V'ikadetani asa b'chamaisei. Another opinion was he's not allowed to marry his mother-in-law. So what is the machlokes based on? So the Gemara explains, Chadek Rabbi Shmuel, one opinion is like Rabbi Shmuel, v'chadek Rabbi Akiva, and another opinion is like Rabbi Akiva. And the Gemara explains, Mandasar, the one that says that he should not marry a mother-in-law, Rabbi Shmuel, so he's going like Rabbi Shmuel's opinion, the Amar chamoisai la'acha mise be'isura kaima, that a mother-in-law, even after a person's wife passes away, the issa to marry a mother-in-law is just as strong as when his wife is alive. And just like when his wife is alive, he's chayiv misa for marrying a mother-in-law. When his wife passes away, the same chayiv misa applies. We had this before in the Gemara. So therefore, v'gabe ger, so by a ger, even though the isser menatayra for the mother-in-law does not apply, but because by a yid, the isser of a mother-in-law is so harsh, gazr b'rabbanan. So the rabbanan were geyser on this. But Uman the Shari, the opinion that says that for a ger, the mother-in-law is allowed after his wife passes away, Rabbi Akiva. He's following Rabbi Akiva's opinion. What did Rabbi Akiva say? The Amar Rabbi Akiva holds chamaisai la'acha misa, a person's mother-in-law after his wife passes away, kolash le isura. The isser of marrying a mother-in-law is weaker. Why is it weaker? Because even though it's aser, but the chiyuv of sreifa, which is the isser, the chiyuv misa, does not apply anymore. So since by a yid, the isser of marrying a mother-in-law after his wife passes away is weaker, so therefore v'gabi ger legazer be'rabbanan. So the chachamim were not so machmir regarding a ger, and they were not geyser for this. For the ger, he's allowed to marry the mother-in-law.